Wow. The forest whispered dark secrets on that moonless night. Jason, the newly transformed vampire, felt the weight of the battle between humans, werewolves, and his own kind heavy on his heart. But something even heavier struck him. A sharp, desperate cry from Linda, the beautiful Native American woman with piercing eyes. She, having discovered her ancestral powers linked to the wolves, was running through the menacing shadows. Is she in danger? And more importantly, will Jason be able to save her before it's too late? The answer is about to be sealed in blood and love? The forest was a labyrinth of dense shadows, where ancient trees seemed to whisper terrifying secrets to the wind. The dry, brittle leaves looked like bones scattered on the ground, while the moon, an impassive witness, cast its pale light on the furious battle. Jason, the young vampire, still felt alien in his new skin, the intense cold coursing through his veins contrasting with the fury he saw in the eyes of the human warriors, the transformed werewolves, and the vampires of his own kind. It was a fight for survival, a macabre dance of blood and claws under the merciless gaze of the night. But in that chaos, a cry echoed, a sharp cry full of despair that tore through the air and pierced Jason's heart like a wooden stake. It was Linda's voice. Linda, with her raven black hair and eyes that shone like the purest emerald, ran desperately through the forest. Fear was reflected on her face, but at the same time, a different glow emanated from her, a wild gleam that revealed the awakening of her ancestral strength, the powerful connection with the wolves that inhabited her blood. Her ancestors, ancient indigenous warriors, guarded a secret that was now on the surface, a power as great as it was mysterious, a power she did not yet fully understand, but that she felt growing within her, pulsating and strong as a wolf's heart. The sound of heavy footsteps broke the dry vegetation around her. Linda could hardly breathe, a frozen fear seizing her throat. It wasn't just the steps of one or two creatures, but a horde of vampires, their hungry red eyes gleaming like incandescent embers in the dark. They pursued her with the same ferocity with which they hunted their prey, driven by an insatiable thirst for blood. Linda felt a sharp pain, a burning sensation in her arm, a deep bite, a sinister mark of the vampire's fury. She stumbled over an exposed root and fell, her breath caught in her throat. It was at that moment that Jason saw her. Through the whirlwind of violence, his eyes, black and piercing eyes like the depths of night, met hers. A spark of hope, a ray of light in the horror of the darkness. It was a faint hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, but it was all Linda had. Jason, despite his newly discovered vampiric nature, felt something different when he saw Linda's despair, something beyond the thirst for blood, something that pulled him to her like an invisible magnet. It was a whirlwind of contradictory feelings, revulsion for the violence surrounding him, compassion for the woman who seemed to be the only light in his new dark world, and something he could not yet name, but that caused him a strange agitation in his chest, a mixture of fear, desire, and admiration. He knew time was running out. The vampires were approaching, their claws gleaming in the moonlight, ready to feast on her blood. Jason knew that saving Linda would not only be an act of compassion, but a deadly challenge against his own kind. He found himself torn between his loyalty to his vampire master, the one who had transformed him, and a new, unknown, but undeniably powerful feeling that was welling up in his heart. A feeling he didn't fully understand, but that seemed to scream, save her. Linda's ancestral strength, however, was not dormant. Sensing the imminence of danger, she growled, a low, guttural sound that echoed through the forest like distant thunder. Her eyes changed color, shifting from emerald green to the intense yellow of a hungry wolf. Sharp claws grew from her hands, and her teeth lengthened, revealing a wild animal side she never knew she possessed. The ancestral power, the strength of the wolves, took over her, giving her courage, strength, and superhuman agility. It was a fight for life, a deadly dance under the impassive gaze of the moon, a fight between animal savagery and the bloodlust of her pursuers. Jason knew that even with his newly discovered powers, protecting Linda would be an arduous task. The battle was only just beginning, and the fate of Linda, and possibly his own, hung by a thread. But something new was beginning to emerge in his heart, something that promised to be as strong as the very strength of the wolves that inhabited Linda's soul. A feeling that could be the beginning of a passion capable of changing the bloody war into something as beautiful as it was unexpected. A love that transcended the boundaries between species. a flame that could illuminate the darkness, even in the midst of such a deadly battle. The forest fell silent for a moment, the violence contained in anticipation. The vampires surrounded Linda, their black shadows lurking like hungry predators. Linda, transformed, roared, a sound that was not human, a primal scream that echoed through the trees, a warning to her executioners and a demonstration of her newly discovered power. Her senses were sharpened, faster. She smelled the metallic scent of the vampire's blood. She felt their malignant pulse, the insatiable thirst that drove them. But at the same time, she felt Jason's presence, a point of warmth in the icy darkness that surrounded her. Her heart, quickened by fear and adrenaline, beat strongly, a frantic rhythm that echoed the silent barking of the wolves in her blood. The strength of her ancestors gave her power, but it also brought her deep confusion. This power was something new, wild, and she didn't yet know how to fully control it. The fight began as a whirlwind of claws and teeth. Linda, agile and ferocious, dodged the vampire's attacks, her movements quick and precise like those of a hungry feline. She fought with the strength of 10 men, the ancestral fury fueling her strength, making her an indomitable warrior. But there were many of them, and every moment she suffered new wounds, her skin tearing under the onslaught of sharp claws. Jason watched, torn between revulsion at the violence and admiration for Linda's courage. He saw the ferocity in her eyes, the unwavering determination, the strength that emanated from within her like an incandescent flame. With every movement, every blow struck, he saw her closer to death, and at the same time, closer to his own heart. One of the vampires, larger and stronger, lunged at Linda, his claws extended in a deadly blow. At this moment, Jason could no longer control himself. Instinct, stronger than any fear or loyalty, threw him into the fight. He threw himself between Linda and the vampire, using all his newly discovered strength to intercept the attack. It was a brutal fight, an exchange of violent and swift blows, under the impassive gaze of the moon and the terrifying silence of the forest. Jason's supernatural strength, combined with Linda's animal ferocity, united against the horde of vampires. The battle, however, was unequal. More vampires arrived, reinforcing the attack. Linda, wounded and exhausted, staggered, her ancestral strength beginning to fade. Jason felt the same exhaustion, the weight of his new vampiric nature asserting itself. His strength was great, but the opponents were many. However, he could not give up. He clung to a thread of hope, to a new and unknown feeling that burned in his chest, a feeling that connected him to Linda, a deep and visceral bond that transcended the brutality of war. Was it love? He didn't know, but it was something strong enough to propel him to fight with a strength he didn't even believe he possessed. Suddenly, a cry echoed through the forest. It was a different cry, a powerful voice that echoed pain and rage, but also an aura of absolute control over the chaos. It was Jason's master, an ancient and powerful vampire, who appeared, interrupting the fight. His eyes fixed on Jason, and a heavy silence hung in the air, more menacing than the noise of the battle. The vampire master looked at Linda, wounded, but imposing in her ancestral strength, and an enigmatic smile formed on his lips. What was he planning? The fight was far from over, and a new, even more dangerous chapter opened in Jason and Linda's search for love. The forest whispered again, but now the whisper was one of suspense. The lovers' fate was in the hands of the ancient vampire. His decision could seal their love or seal their tragic separation. The forest whispered dark secrets on that dark night, and the battle between humans, werewolves, and vampires had reached its peak. Linda, the Native American woman with piercing eyes, ran through the darkness, her ancestral powers awakening with force. Fear was palpable, but in her heart, a new power, the strength of the wolves of her ancestors, seethed. Jason, the newly transformed vampire, pursued her, not only out of loyalty to his master, but out of a greater force, a feeling born in his chest, warm and terrifying at the same time. He saw the danger surrounding her, a horde of hungry vampires, their red eyes gleaming like embers. Linda stumbled, fell, and the sharp pain of a bite pierced her arm. It was then that Jason saw her, his eyes meeting hers amidst the chaos. It was a ray of hope in the midst of darkness, a spark that ignited a new feeling in his vampiric heart, a feeling that contradicted his new nature. He had to save her. Time was short. The vampires were approaching, their movements swift and deadly. Jason knew that saving Linda would mean confronting his own kind, challenging the loyalty he owed his master, confronting the dark nature that consumed him. But the strength of his compassion was greater than the bloodlust that dominated him. He could not hesitate. Linda's roar tore through the darkness, a primal sound that revealed her transformation. Her eyes shone like those of a wolf, her claws lengthened, and a wild power enveloped her. It was the ancestral strength, the legacy of her warrior ancestors, and she would use it to survive. The fight was brutal, a deadly dance of claws and teeth. Linda, with the supernatural agility of wolves, dodged the attacks, counterattacking with the fury of a wild animal. But the vampires were numerous, and with each wound, her ancestral power seemed to weaken. Jason watched the fight, his heart heavy with anguish. He saw Linda's courage, her strength, her despair. It was this same strength that impelled him to act. His loyalty was tested, divided between his master and a new feeling, an overwhelming feeling that he could not understand, but that propelled him into danger. A vampire, larger and stronger, lunged at Linda, his claws aiming for a sure blow. It was then that Jason acted. He threw himself between them, his body moving with supernatural speed, intercepting the attack. The fight was violent, an exchange of swift and brutal blows. Jason fought not only for Linda's survival, but for his own soul, for the chance to embrace this new feeling that dominated him. The force of the battle was immense, but Jason's determination was greater. He fought like a wounded lion, his supernatural strength contrasting with Linda's ancestral strength. Together, they formed a whirlwind of violence, defending themselves against the hungry vampires. But the battle was becoming unequal. The vampires were numerous, and Linda and Jason, despite their strength, were becoming exhausted. Linda's wounds bled, her ancestral power diminished, exhaustion set in. Exhaustion also weighed on Jason, the newly discovered vampiric nature demanding its price. Despite their united efforts, the danger was imminent. At the moment when hope seemed to vanish, a new cry echoed through the forest, a cry of power, of command. It was Jason's master, an ancient and powerful vampire. His sudden appearance interrupted the battle. His eyes fell upon Jason, upon Linda, wounded and exhausted, but still fighting with the ancestral strength of the wolves. A mysterious smile appeared on his lips, a smile that froze the blood in Jason's veins. The battle was over, but the war was far from over. A new chapter began, full of mystery and suspense, with the fate of Jason and Linda in the hands of the old vampire. The forest, in silence, waited, while the fate of the lovers was decided in the master's cold gaze. Would Jason and Linda's newly discovered love be a flame lit in the midst of war, or a spark that would be extinguished in the darkness of the night? The suspense was total. The search for love among humans, werewolves, and vampires would reach its peak. The vampire master's decision would determine the fate of Jason and Linda. The forest fell silent, the violence contained in a moment of deadly expectation. The vampire master, imposing and dark, observed Linda and Jason both exhausted, wounded, but united by a thin thread of hope, perhaps even of love. The elder's gaze was cold, calculating, and a cruel smile contorted his lips. He did not interfere to save Jason or Linda, but to observe them. A frigid silence hung in the air, more menacing than the fight itself. Then, in a hoarse, deep voice, which echoed like distant thunder, he spoke. "I see you, young vampire, your compassion, your weakness, and you, wild Indian, the ancestral strength that runs in your veins. Both are interesting pieces in my game." He extended a hand, and a dark, sinister mist emanated from his long, sharp nails. The mist enveloped Linda, imprisoning her in a cocoon of shadows. Jason tried to approach, but the vampire master stopped him with a withering glance. "Don't come closer, Jason. This Indian woman, she is more powerful than you imagine. Her blood, her power, is a valuable asset, and I want it for myself." Linda, inside the dark mist, screamed, fighting against the unknown force that imprisoned her. Her eyes, even in the shadows, shone with fury, with determination. Jason, desperate, felt Linda's energy diminishing, her ancestral power fading. Fury consumed him. He was ready to confront the old vampire, even knowing it would be an unequal fight. But before he could act, the vampire master raised one of his hands, and a bolt of black energy struck Jason's chest, throwing him backward, unconscious. Linda remained trapped in the mist, her last words echoing like a lament. Jason, the vampire master, with a triumphant smile, watched Jason's fallen body and Linda's silhouette disappearing into the black mist. He turned, disappearing into the dense shadows of the forest, leaving Jason unconscious and Linda at the mercy of his dark plans. The forest whispered terrible secrets, the whispers heralding a new and more menacing phase of the battle, a new chapter of suffering for the lovers, and the discovery of an ancestral secret that involved Linda, Jason, and the vampire master. What does the vampire master intend to do with Linda's power? And what is the ancestral secret he hides? Will Jason survive? And more importantly, will Jason and Linda be able to reunite and fight together to face the mortal danger that approaches? The forest, now silent, awaited the continuation of the story, a mystery full of blood, magic, and a love that blossoms in the midst of a bloody war. The fate of Jason and Linda, and perhaps of the entire supernatural world, hung by a thread, plunged into darkness and uncertainty.